smoke. Ari, thank you very much. Man, I tell you what, we've got a game that Utah, Texas Tech in Salt Lake City. The defending champions, Arizona State, have been a little bit iffy. They're in Waco against Baylor. Maybe starting to have at least even more of a clue of who's going to be there at the top, although there's a long way to go.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the game that's, getting all the headlines this week is Utah, Texas Tech. But I mean, I would argue Arizona State and Baylor is as big as that matchup is all four of those teams figure to be at the top of the conference. So, I mean, a very interesting week in the conference overall, because you've got, Kansas and West Virginia as well from a conference game standpoint. And then North Carolina and UCF, which Bill Belichick has taken to calling Central this week instead of UCF. And then, of course, TCU and SMU. And, it's funny. TCU has been very under the radar. They played 2 games. One of them was against Abilene Christian in a game that you kind of expect them to blow them out a little bit more than they did. And, SMU we haven't seen since what happened against Baylor for them. So a really interesting slate this week. And, I hope that Baylor has figured out some things defensively, because Jordan Tyson's the best receiver in college football. And Jordan Tyson and Sam Leavitt had great games this past week, albeit against a Texas State defense that's not very good. But if Baylor hasn't shored up some of their defensive woes, they're going to have major issues against the running game and the passing game and the offense of Arizona State.
I got to chastise myself. I kept talking up Kanye Udo in the offseason, maybe because I was just kind of excited about a big power runner from Army, just completely left Rayleigh Brown out of the discussion. And look, they've already kind of gotten him going. If they can add like other levels to that running game, it's just going to make that Leavitt and Tyson combo more lethal. And I kind of expect to see that against a Baylor team that has not been good against the run so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a strength of Arizona State. It's not as big of a strength as it was last year with Scadaboo, but still a major strength. And, Rayleigh Brown, to your point, with all of the focus and attention on the transfer portal and Udo in the addition there, but also Kyson Brown, as a guy that was coming into the season, their number one back. And then, he's dealt with some setbacks from injuries. But even without him, they ran wild. Even in a losing effort against Mississippi State. The difference was it's a different running style. Like, they got shut out of the goal line, which is something we never saw them do with Cam Scadaboo. So, it's an interesting approach, but they've got a much, more lethal passing attack. Mississippi State did a really good job to really neutralize that Arizona State offense. I mean, Leavitt probably had his worst game in that game. And, with Shimon Mateer emerging again, I mean, this is a big time target at tight end. And then, Jordan Tyson had some just ridiculous plays last week in their win. Look, they are certainly a run-first team. They've got a really good stable of backs. It's a lot different in terms of the run game what the run game was last year. And then their pass game. I mean, we know Baylor has been susceptible to the run. It's been susceptible to the big play. I mean, they just have not defended very well. And so, like, if I look at this game, I think offensively these teams are very similar. Robertson has been better so far than Leavitt's been. But defensively, I think that's where Arizona State, has been a major difference maker. I mean, they weren't great in the Mississippi State game, but I mean, overall, this is a better defense than what Baylor has shown so far.
Yeah, I flip-flopped on who I'm picking in this game. Normally with Baylor games, I have a pretty good feel for it. Like, I just kind of have a knack for kind of knowing what's what. I have no idea on this one. I think it's going to be a shootout to some degree with these two quarterbacks and offenses. But do you have I don't know if you guys make picks or win or whatever. I don't want to steal your thunder there, but do you have a lean even for this game right now?
I'm with you. I mean, it's tough. I mean, I still can't get over the SMU game. Like, I still don't know how they won that game.
Yeah.
Other than, the missed kicks played a crucial role in Sawyer Robertson basically being in everything. Look, I think, again, are we putting faith in Dave Aranda from a defensive perspective when, like, that was my reasoning for why I picked Baylor to win the Big 12. I figured with what they had in offense and that Aranda would be able to fix the defense. And so far, we haven't seen that. And so, are we at this point, it's sort of like we're expecting to see something we haven't yet seen. So, that's blind faith that suddenly this defense is going to be something completely different than what it's already been and already showed. I mean, the improvements that they were going to make, you would have expected them to make them this offseason. So I guess what I'm talking myself into leaning Arizona State, but this is this is a toughie. And I mean, it's really sort of interesting. Arizona State has this really long stretch here of playing Texas teams. They played Texas State. They've got Baylor. They've got TCU and Tech on the on the docket up forthcoming. Now those games are in Tempe, so maybe it's a little bit different to not be visiting Texas, but they're doing like a Texas two-step here in their schedule. Ultimately, I guess I'm leaning Arizona State early in the week, but I mean, this seems like as much of a pick 'em as you can possibly get. And I think it's a 1.5 point spread, which shows you that the Vegas lean is more Arizona State because you get 3 points for being at home.
Yeah, in a Saturday night too, so it's a nice opportunity for both those teams to have a little showcase and a great game. But yes, it's kind of fun to start getting to conference play. It's a good mix of non-cons and conference games this week. But I felt like West Virginia last week had to have like they're like a fan base walking through the desert completely parched. And here was this ice cold Gatorade beating Pitt in the backyard brawl. I don't know that it carries over. I doubt it right now into Kansas. But how much do you think just that oomph of that win meant to the West Virginia fan base and then potentially propels them into this matchup against Kansas?
You know, the quote from Richard after the game was, "It's just one win." And then he sort of stopped himself and said, well, it's kind of worth like a win and a half. And I tend to agree with him. You know, I remember this from a few years ago. Mike Casaza from Ear Sports, who's their 247, the West Virginia 24/7 page. You know, he basically made some comments that like, when West Virginia plays Pitt, the amount of hits that the website gets versus when West Virginia played Texas, which obviously at that point was a conference team, it just pales in comparison. And Texas was a good example because it's like, that's a big team that everybody should want to beat. And I mean, the point being that like, you know, nobody it's a West Virginia fan that lives in the East Coast, that lives in Morgantown, that lives in that area, like goes to work and sees Texas fans. You know, the idea here is if you're a Baylor fan living in Dallas, like you go to work and you see Texas Tech fans and you see Texas fans. And like, that's the whole idea of like, these are friends of yours. They're around you. Like that's where the rivalry is born out of. And so West Virginia is really, really much alone in that regard. And so Pitt is still that for them. And Pitt is still a huge difference maker on their schedule. So that's a big win. And especially considering what happened last year, where it was the exact inverse of what happened this year. That game was remarkable. Sort of the same SMU Baylor finish. West Virginia was down 10 with 9 minutes to go. They had played 3 quarterbacks in the game, including a true freshman who threw back-to-back picks. He threw 2 picks in 5 plays and both in plus territory. And West Virginia's defense is so good. They held them to only 6 points of those 2 picks. They didn't even pick up a first down. They got 2 interceptions, did not pick up a first down and kick field goals. And that obviously saved the day. It was improbable. I don't know where this line is now in terms of the Kansas West Virginia game. I know that when it started, it was like 11.5 favoring Kansas, which was the most that Kansas has ever been favored in a Big 12 game in like 2 decades. So, and that obviously isn't surprising to a lot of people. So, you know, it feels like this game should be closer than that. But yeah, I mean, West Virginia does not have an offense. They're really good defensively. How weird is that for a Rich Rod team? Mm-hmm. But their offense is so bad that he tried 3 different quarterbacks to try to make something work, including a true freshman who led a touchdown drive and then led two straight drives with interceptions. So, you know, I'm assuming they're going to go back to Markiel. You know, Markiel is kind of a dual threat, but he doesn't have the same speed and abilities as a Scotty Fox, who's the true freshman, or as Jalen Henderson, who they've been trying a few times and just isn't as good of a thrower. And so I think that's where it goes back to Markiel. I wouldn't be surprised to see them continue to work in multiple quarterbacks, and maybe they'll go back to Fox at some point because he's got the upside as that true freshman, but they just haven't figured it out on offense. You know, I feel like though they did have the emergence of Ty Edwards, who's a guy that I thought, you know, kind of like Paul was talking about with Kanye Udo. I figured in this offseason, they brought in Ty Edwards from Northern Iowa, who's a guy that had been a back-to-back 1,000-yard back, but had not proven it at this level. And they went mostly with Jaheim White and some of these other guys in their backfield, Clay Ash, and voila, they unveil Ty Edwards and he has a huge game. So, I mean, that could potentially unlock some more of their offense because they were just trying all different things without Jaheim White to try to get their offense rolling. But I mean, make no mistake about it. This defense is legit. West Virginia's defense, again, look at the point total they gave up and consider that West Virginia's offense set Pitt up in plus territory multiple times in the second half of this game, and they still got stops. Eddie Kelly Jr. As a pass rusher is really good. And they haven't even gotten, or as an interior defensive lineman, they haven't even gotten their best pass rusher, which is Jamori Robinson, who transferred from UTSA, who's a double-digit sack guy last year, who's could potentially play this week. He's finally been ruled eligible going into last week's game. So we thought maybe we would see him in this game last week, but we didn't see him at all. So the defense is legit. The offense has major things to work out. So I do like Kansas in this game in terms of, I just don't know that you can go toe to toe with Kansas's offense, who's had a week off and has looked really good to start this season.
I do. I mean, we're going to talk about Texas Tech and Utah in a second, because we haven't, gone full deep into that. But how concerned should fans be about Colorado, at least in the short term? I have two theories on the quarterback situation. And the prevailing one is just, well, I guess the other two guys aren't good enough yet, and he threw Staub in there to see what was going on. Or he borrowed a place from the Coach Saban playbook, and in order to teach Lewis and Salter a lesson about how he doesn't care what they think or how much NIL are recruited, that if they're not practicing to the level he wants them to, he will bench them.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, Paul. I mean, your guess is as good as mine in terms of the thinking there. It's sort of antithetical, I think, to how we think of Deion especially given, he literally said when he took the job that he was bringing his Louis, and Ryan Staub I wouldn't consider him Louis Vuitton luggage. So it's a complete about face when Salter and Lewis are the two Louis in this situation. And yeah, it's a great story. The issue is he didn't play very well. With the exception of basically two drives in that game, one at the end of the first half where he was really impressive. And then he cut the lead to 16-14, which made it very close. And then later in the game, he had another touchdown drive. But other than that, he was, not very good at all. And so, yeah, I think you've got a situation here where Staub is the guy that's, been on campus here. He's much more familiar with Pat Shurmur's offense. Salter, week one did not look comfortable within that offense. Seemed like he wanted to run, every time the first or second read wasn't there. And so, yeah, I think there's, a potential of trying to feel this thing out to figure out who his best player is. It could very well be what you said it is. And, if that's the case, then I think we'll see Staub again. I would probably go back to Salter at this point because he just gives you way more upside as a runner. And if Staub did what he did, now look, Houston's a good defense and probably a better defense than Kansas, but still, I don't know that what we saw from Staub is not anything better than what you can get from Salter. So maybe it is just as simple as, he's trying to emphasize practice habits and some of those things you were just talking about, Paul. But if all things being equal, it feels like at this point, Salter's probably got to be the guy. And maybe part of this is just simplifying the offense. We understand, Pat Shurmur, longtime NFL offensive coordinator, NFL head coach, right? More of a pro style. Obviously, Deion and his coaching staff. You're talking about a who's who of all pro Hall of Fame type players on that coaching staff. So it's very much a pro style. But if you've got a quarterback that's got a ton of talent, as we know Salter does, but isn't figuring out how to work within the scope of the offense, then isn't it on you to kind of simplify some things to make it easier for him? So, if you don't do that, then maybe Staub's the better guy because he's been within this offense and has a better idea. But again, he did not look great, even knowing the offense through most of that game. He just didn't give them much of a chance to win. And Houston kept the door open for them in the second half. Houston kept settling for field goals in that game. They kicked 6 field goals, made 5 of them. They turned those field goals into touchdowns in the second half. But, Colorado had some opportunities there they just could not take advantage of.
Ari, you mentioned about, going back to Caden Salter and him not being comfortable. Do you think that this maybe leads, especially since Juju Lewis is kind of a similar player, at least in skill set, that maybe Deion makes some coaching changes in the offseason?
It's a great question. Sure.
Yeah.
Look, I don't anticipate this being a very successful season for Colorado. They do have a ton of talent, but they still haven't figured out how to run the football. It's now another year where they're just completely ineffective running the football. Defensively, that's where they took the biggest step last year, and it feels like they've already taken a step back this year because they've now let, Georgia Tech and Houston just ran all over them, especially with the quarterback run. Connor Wigman, to me so far hasn't shown a ton in terms of throwing the ball, but he's been very effective running, and especially against Colorado. So, I mean, look, teams are going to watch film. They're going to figure out how to run their quarterback on them. There's a lot of good running quarterbacks in this league. So, yeah, I mean, let's let this thing play out. I don't anticipate them improving dramatically, and it starts to me with the quarterback position, which they have not figured out. They've got a lot of talent there, but clearly do not look very good at quarterback. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you've got to figure out how to get the running game going, and it's just multiple years now, and you've got a good enough offensive line that it shouldn't be as big of an issue as it is. And is it the running backs you have? Is it the offensive schemes? I mean, I think that's probably all part of it. But yeah, I think if things go south this year, to your point, Paul, like Pat Shurmur is probably the guy that should go, and you probably need more of a collegiate offense.
All right, so Utah at home, Salt Lake City, big noon kickoff against Texas Tech. These two teams have not been tested at all. Not sure. UCLA obviously was no big deal. Utah blew them up. Your thoughts about who would it be a bigger win for if between the two?
Great question. I don't know that I could easily figure that out. I mean, I think both these teams are trying to substantiate what they have, right? So would it be a bigger win for? Well, Utah's trying to substantiate what they've started with. I mean, both of these teams haven't played anybody yet. Let's start there. Who's the better team right now, UCLA or Oregon State? I don't know, but those are the toughest teams in those two opponents. So
don't make me watch that game.
Yeah. And I forget who it is off the top of my head, but there's another Big 12 team playing Oregon State this week. So yeah, Malik Murphy, guys, the former Texas quarterback, does not look good at all. I was thinking going into that game that he looked decent, but my goodness, did he not look good at all?
Yeah, Houston gets them next week in Corvallis.
Yeah. So, look, this is a huge game for both, honestly. I mean, both of these teams are trying to prove and substantiate what they are. And, that is teams at the top of the conference. I don't know that the loser will not, but this is the first major data point for two teams that have not really been tested. And so, I mean, you're really ramping it up here. I mean, you're going kind of like going from an offseason to starting off against Auburn. I mean, that's a difficult deal to where you just haven't played anybody, either of these teams, close to this level. I mean, these are offensive and defensive lines that are NFL-like. I mean, there are a lot of NFL players playing on both of these offensive and defensive lines. So, it's in some ways a shame this game is happening so early, but in other ways it's sort of intriguing because it's not Baylor versus Texas Tech or Baylor versus Utah, where it's a team that's been tested versus a team that's not been tested. It's two teams very similar that have not been tested that match up very similarly in terms of, really good running games, good defenses. They're good up front on both lines of scrimmage. I'm still a little bit concerned with Utah's weapons. I think Texas Tech probably is a little bit better in that category. But it's a long season. There's still a lot of football to be played. And I think we look at this conference and say, it's still a league of parity until proven otherwise. And so, I mean, the league needs both of these teams to not, whoever loses this game to continue to win so that there is one loss on their schedule and the team that wins to continue to win so that this league is more top heavy. But, it's a really great opportunity for the Big 12. Two top 17 teams probably should be ranked higher in an early kickoff, in a great environment and I love the subplot to this game, guys, where like Texas Tech has always felt like they've been slighted, obviously with Texas previously, now with Utah. Like our buddy Chris Level came out and was like, I don't know why Utah came in here like, they were like, this was the Pac-12 and they had won something and should act like that. And so he started to throw some fire on the Utah Flame. They've come back. So it's been this great back and forth. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Utah has a lot to prove in this league because last year they were terrible. And, interestingly enough, the only Big 12 game that Utah's won at home so far is the second week game they had against Baylor, which was not technically a Big 12 game. They did not win a Big 12 game at home last year. There are 2 wins in conference. Again, the Baylor win notwithstanding, because that is technically a conference or a game against the conference opponent, but not a conference game. They haven't won a conference home. They haven't won a conference home game yet. So they've got a lot to prove. And I think Texas Tech has a lot to prove because the target is on their backs. I mean, Utah to a degree has that, but Texas Tech spent all the money. There's been a lot written about them this offseason, a lot more written about Texas Tech in terms of, the team they could have more than Utah. So it's a great question, Smokey. I don't know. I mean, I think you can make the case that it's, more important for both of these teams, which means that, like, obviously it's a huge game. It's hugely important. It's not going to decide the conference, but it could go a long way in deciding the conference, especially if both of these teams, end up at the end, with one or less losses.
I want to lump a couple of games together, just kind of get your rapid fire on these two. The Big 12 and ACC have played like a handful of times already this year. You had West Virginia beat Pitt, Baylor beat SMU, BYU beat Stanford, TCU beat North Carolina. Colorado did lose to Georgia Tech, but you got SMU, TCU, last iron skillet for the foreseeable future, and North Carolina back, but in Orlando for a group of Knights that are they got a little bit of confidence to them right now. Your thoughts just on these two games, these little Big 12 ACC duels here?
Yeah, Craig, it's interesting because the Big 12 has sort of dominated the ACC so far in the non-conference, but that's about it. They did not win a game against the SEC, and we're okay against the Big 10. Obviously got the win over Iowa, the win over UCLA, which, again, Big 10, that's just still throwing me off. Just trying to think off the top of my head if there are other Big 10 wins that the Big 12 has had so far. But yeah, so, against the SEC and the Big 10, not great, but domination against the ACC. And so, UCF having the week off, I think so far UCF has looked a little bit better than I expected. I still have major question marks at quarterback, but at least they've seemed to have figured out who their better quarterback is. I certainly expect North Carolina to have a better showing than they did week one. And I think it was a couple of things. Let's start with the fact that it was the first game for North Carolina. They didn't really know what to expect. And TCU is a supremely talented team. So, and I know that like the TCU, the TCU line in that game is pretty high. I expect TCU to blow out SMU, especially considering what happened last year and all that jazz. So, look, the Big 12 is clearly a head and shoulders above the ACC in terms of the hierarchy of these conferences. I think there's a lot of metrics to look into that. And then when you look head to head, it's done well. It's about the only conference the Big 12 has done well against. And so, yeah, it's should be a fun couple of non-conference games throwing in with the conference games that we have. I honestly, I don't know what to expect North Carolina UCF. I expect them to be better, but I don't know. They played Richmond and Charlotte. So how much do we really know about how much better they are? And, UCF isn't that good, but I'm not sure North Carolina is either. So I know that I'm sure that Scott Frost has spent a lot of time in the off week looking at some of the film from that TCU game and then looking at the film from their last two wins and seeing what was different. But this is kind of what they are. Like Bill Belichick's not the type to kind of change his stripes. Like he is who he is. Schematically, they are who they are. And that's what it is.
All right, Paul, one more.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when you look at the way rosters have been built, Texas Tech, Utah, compared to, I just think the analogy of Deion I'm bringing Louis. I think Tech and Utah, even though they both went big, they went with Samsonite. Like they went with reliable, like not necessarily fancy. Now Devin Dampier's a different thing, but they went with Samsonite, right? That those guys are more reliable than they are flashy.
Samson, it feels like an outdated reference.
No, listen, they're a fantastic company.
We had that on our way to Japan in the late 60s.
Yeah, hey,
we go like with away,
They're one of our sponsors too. But yeah, like, listen, Samsonite has stood the test of time. And I say this with a wife who has a million Louis purses, and I'm afraid to even look at them. I'm afraid to even look at them.
Yeah. Oh, more than one Louis.
Okay.
One Louis.
Oh, she's got.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, look, are we talking about like the substance of what they built along their offensive and defensive lines? Is that kind of
yeah.
Colorado did too. They brought in Jordan Seaton, who's going to be a first round pick at left tackle. Initially Deion did bring in a lot of flash, and they still certainly have a lot of flash. They haven't proven their ability to have substance. To your point, last year their defense was much better, but their offense, they still could not run the football. And this is probably the best version of the offensive line that they've had, and yet it's still not good enough to be able to run the football consistently. So, I think Deion knows you still have to build up front on both lines of scrimmage. And that is clearly where Texas Tech made the most hay. But Texas Tech had to. I don't think strategically they decided we're going to spend all this money, shoring up our offensive line with a bunch of NFL players along their offensive line, especially in their defensive line too. In some of these blowouts, they've had guys that were, major defensive line rotational pieces that were playing, in the third and fourth quarter of blowouts, meaning these guys were so much lower on their depth chart, which shows just how much the talent has improved along that defensive line, where these guys were like starters and now they're bench clearing guys. So, I mean, I think it was a need. They didn't need a new quarterback. They didn't need to spend money on a quarterback. If they did, they probably would have. They needed to spend money, they did. And that's where I think, a lot of people are probably not understanding the full scope of what Texas Tech did. They didn't just spend a bunch of money. They did it strategically in the right spots where they just weren't very good. They were not very good along their offensive line. I think some of Baron Morton's performances last year are a reflection of how bad they were along their offensive line. He was constantly under duress. So, like, when you look at the two areas where they were bad last year, it's the offensive and defensive line. So they needed to shore that up. And I mean, with Utah, that's just kind of always how they are. Like, defense is what they do, and especially defensive line. I remember coming into this season, it was like, well, how good are they going to be on their defensive line? We don't really know these personnel. Like, they lost Tanavasu to BYU. It's like, well, they've just turned over their personnel. How much better are they going to be? Every year, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who their personnel are. Like, their Utah defense is always good, especially on the defensive line, regardless of personnel. And yeah, I mean, I think coming into this season, you could see they probably have. I mean, they've got a top 10 pick in Spencer Fano. They've got another bookend at right tackle. It's probably a first round pick. I mean, they've got NFL offensive linemen across the board, probably at least three NFL offensive linemen. So it's not as if they strategically placed that way. Like, this is kind of always who they've been under Kyle Whittingham. They've just been a meat and potatoes kind of football team. Like, we're going to defend you. We're going to run the ball. We're going to make throws when we need to. But ultimately, we want this to be a low scoring, low possession game.